This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to Downrigger at montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny, and welcome into the Montana Outdoor Podcast Studio. So glad you chose to join us today to explore more of Montana's great outdoors. Want to give a special welcome to our men and women of the United States Armed Forces. We love to see you join us here each week, and we hope we bring a little bit of home back to you while you're out protecting us all around the world. Thank you, and also thanks to all of our wonderful veterans out there as well. Thank you all for your service to our great country. To everyone listening here, I have a favor to ask of you, as I always do. When you get a chance, please share this podcast to your social media and with your family and friends. Now, I'm excited for this podcast today because we're going to talk about how the walleye egg collection effort went, since that just wrapped up not long ago. That is so important to all of us walleye fisher folk, and not just those that fish Fort Peck Reservoir, but for all of those all across the state, as a great deal of those walleye that come from those eggs are stocked in other walleye fisheries all over Montana. So how many eggs did they end up with? Who counts them? How long does it take for them to hatch? And out of those, how many actually make it to the water and eventually onto our dinner plate, and so on? So Fort Peck Fisheries biologist Heath Headley and Fort Peck Fish Hatchery manager Wade Geraets are here, along with my best friend and fishing buddy. Heath and Wade, thanks so much for joining me today. And, here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, we have got just a ton of new listeners, which, by the way, thank you all out there for that. So I thought, before we get into this whole podcast about the walleye spawn and some other things going on in Fort Peck Reservoir, I thought it'd be best for the two of you to talk a bit about who you are and all that for our folks, and then we'll get going from there. As far as other person on the podcast with me, that's none other than the captain of the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. Captain, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be invited, Downrigger. I've always enjoyed spending a lot of time with you, and you're one of the greatest podcasters that I've ever known. Thank you.
Well, now that you said that, I'll keep your mic up then. Very good. All right. So Wade Geraets, is that right, Geraets?
Geraets, yep, that's right.
Wade, let's start with you. Tell us a bit about yourself so our listeners know who you are and what you do.
All right, I'm the hatchery manager for the Fort Peck Fish Hatchery. I've been here for just over 15 years now. And prior to that, I started with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks back in 2006 as a fish culturalist down in Lewistown. And then I moved up here in 2010 and became the manager in 2011.
All right, great. Thanks, Wade. And Heath Headley, of course, those of you that listen to this podcast often, you've heard that name because Heath has been on here several times with me. Heath, talk a bit about what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I am the fisheries biologist for Fort Peck Reservoir, and I have been here since 2006. So yeah, just this position. But prior to that, I did some seasonal work in South Dakota where I grew up. Also worked in Wyoming and then in Indiana, actually up on southern Lake Michigan for a little while. So bounced around a little bit, but was fortunate enough to move out to Montana, and yeah, I've been here ever since.
Well, and I think most of our listeners know who the captain is of the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. And Captain, you just spent some time in Florida. How was that?
It was okay. A lot of sun down in Florida. I missed Heath and I missed Wade, so I'm glad to be on the podcast.
And you missed me, right?
I what's your name again? Oh, you got it on your T-shirt. It's Downrigger Dale. Yes.
Yeah. It's you've got a nice tan, so it looks like you spent some time in the sunshine.
I got some tan lines.
Did people try to roll you back into the water while you were laying out on the beach?
A couple of times, yeah. I've known Heath quite a while, and I just got to know Wade because I have a place over there. We call it the Montana Outdoor Radio Show Fort Peck headquarters, and you run into these guys once in a while, and they kind of run the other way, but then I catch them, and then we start talking about we talk about fish biologist stuff that I know everything about and Heath knows nothing about. And then we talk about the hatchery stuff, which Wade knows nothing about and I know about everything. I've always wanted to jump in one of those swimming ponds they're not swimming ponds, but they're spawning ponds.
Yeah,
and
that would kill all the fish, I'm sure.
And Wade's got them all full right now. I noticed I was there last week. But these guys know what they're doing, and they know the lake, and it's going to be interesting for me to find out a little bit of information. I've got some questions that I would like to ask, but I'll let you get going.
Yeah, so one of the main topics I want to cover today is one that most of the Fort Peck walleye fishermen and women are very interested in, and that is how the walleye spawn and walleye egg collection efforts went this year on Fort Peck Reservoir. So since I have the two main leaders of that effort, I thought it would be a good idea to start with the process itself. So let's start with this. And either one of you can jump in on here. It's why does the FWP collect walleye eggs, and how long have they been doing it? Now, is that because the walleye cannot sustain their own population without you doing that, or is it mainly so you got eggs for other waterways than that?
Yeah, I think I can go ahead there and take
Sure.
this question, Dale, first. And FWP, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, has been doing this trap netting egg collection effort for, like close to 35 years now, really, just on Fort Peck. Interestingly enough, they did it a little bit before, 35 years, and they actually looked at a couple other different water bodies, here in the state, Montana, for very similar thing, go out, trap net walleyes, collect the eggs, for like hatchery propagation purposes. And, they tried it down on the Yellowstone, also tried it over Tongue River Reservoir, a couple other water bodies. And really, when it all was kind of said and done, they looked at Fort Peck, and it was like, that just seems to be, much more consistent in terms of numbers of fish, sizes of fish, and just being able to get their hands on, a sufficient amount of eggs, with not, too many logistics and effort going into it, I guess, kind of in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, and as far as, kind of why we do this, at least in the case of Fort Peck, a good portion of these eggs that we collect will go back as fingerlings and some as fry. And that's just to supplement the walleye population out there. It's not meant to take the form of, any reproduction going on out in Fort Peck, because there's, in some years, Fort Peck, there's walleyes that are spawning their own and, somewhat successfully. It's really dependent on reservoir elevations is what it boils down to. And that's kind of where, this consistent effort kind of stemmed from, again, to get consistent numbers of eggs and hopefully stock out, consistent numbers of fingerlings or fry, just to supplement the population and, hopefully provide angler opportunities or additional angler opportunities. Because like I said, boy, water levels, really key into managing any fishery, when it comes right down to it. And then, as a result of these collection efforts as well, there's, boy, I think close to 20 other walleye water bodies here in the state of Montana, and maybe Wade can, kind of give a more specific number or something to confirm that. But yeah, that's why we do this, on an annual basis.
So Heath, I got a question for you. Do you think Fort Peck walleye fishery would be just as good if you didn't do the egg collection? I know that you're saying you're supplementing it, but I've noticed that there's walleyes, the females are caught this time of the year in Duck Creek and really all over the lake in certain, it's a big lake, 134 miles long. Do you think it would survive if you didn't have this program going on?
It would be extremely variable, and that's the thing. I guess talking about the fish themselves, so we do this effort and then additional netting efforts to monitor kind of like their ages and, sizes and whatnot. If we didn't do it, we probably wouldn't see as much of a consistent, age groups across the board, and different sizes of fish. You might only see, maybe, some larger fish and then, fewer fish in between, or, bigger numbers of smaller fish. Does that make sense? There would be a little more inconsistency, I guess, in terms of the size and age structure out there.
What you're really trying to say is that Rigger and I wouldn't catch any walleye if you didn't have a egg collection hatchery program going on.
If they weren't just completely abundant. Yeah. Now this one probably, I don't know, might be more up Wade's alley here, but, in looking at the article that was posted in the go-to website for Montana Outdoor News, that's montanaoutdoor.com. If you don't go there, you should. It's reported that about 62 million walleye eggs were collected this year. So what I wanted to do is break that number down a bit for our listeners, so we can give them an idea of what that really means to the average fisherman. So let's go about it this way. How did you come to that total number as far as getting that number of 62 million? And please don't tell me there's somebody that sits and collects each egg, 1, 2, 3. So how do you get to that number?
Well, actually, at one time, they actually did that.
Oh, my God.
So back in the day, probably some college students sat around and basically collected a whole bunch of eggs together. And basically what they found out that there's roughly just over 4,000 eggs per 1 ounce. So that's kind of that's basically what we go off of between us and the Miles City it's basically 4,062 eggs per ounce is what the average came out to be. And that's basically what we base all our eggs off. All our walleye eggs are based off that number.
So you just look at how many ounces of eggs and multiply from there. Okay.
Yep.
So
to kind of give you an example, in basically 32 ounces of eggs, there's roughly 130,000 eggs.
Okay. So how does that total number collected of 62 million compare to last year? And if you have the data handy, say the average of the last 5 years, how does that compare?
Average-wise, it's about average. I think last year we actually took about, I think it was 75 or 79 million that were split between the Miles City Hatchery and here in Fort Peck. So average, we try to shoot for 60 million every year. That's about what we can handle for our growing space here, at least for the ponds that we have out here at the hatchery.
Okay. And of that 62 million eggs, how many of those do you figure hatch into some kind of offspring?
We're running roughly on average anywhere between 35 and 45%.
Oh, wow.
That'll hatch.
And then of those eggs that yielded an offspring, how many of those were sent to the Miles City hatchery, or do you just send eggs to the hatchery in Miles City?
We on the majority of the time, we basically just send the eggs from our spawning efforts on the dry arm.
Mm-hmm. So,
and they ended up with almost 14 million this year down there, and we have the rest here.
Okay, so the rest stayed in the hatchery that you worked there. So okay. Yeah. So now, of those young little walleye that hatched out of those eggs, how many get put back into Fort Peck, and what determines that number?
What basically will determine that number is how many will survive here after they hatch. We do lose some after they hatch. You have to look at a walleye right after they hatch. They have about 5 days to survive on their egg yolk. After that, they have to get into some body of water that's going to have some sort of small bugs in the water. We call them zooplankton. And those zooplankton are what feeds those small fry those first 4 to 5 weeks of their growth. So the reason we use our ponds here is the ponds are a lot smaller body of water, so we can stock a certain number of those fry into those ponds that have basically warmed up, produced a good batch of zooplankton, so those walleye can feed and grow.
Wade, how many eggs or fry can you put in each pond?
We've got basically we go by surface acres of water. We have 45 surface acres of water out here, and we stock roughly 150,000 of those per acre of those small walleye fry. So we're anywhere between 7 and 9 million fry that'll go into those ponds out here in the hatchery.
Okay, how long has the Fort Peck hatchery been in operation? It's been, 15 years, 20 years?
We came online in 2006, so right at the 20-year mark.
And before that, everything went to Miles City?
The majority of them went to Miles City. They did do some here using the powerhouses and some of the ponds that are scattered around Fort Peck Reservoir up around the Duck Creek area is kind of where they raised their fingerlings at. But the majority of them did go down to Miles City at that time.
And do you guys know how many, I think you might have said that just a little bit ago, Heath, how many other waterways receive walleye stock then out of all that you've collected there?
I believe it's 20 other water bodies, here in Montana. Does that sound right, Wade? Something like that?
Yeah. Fort Peck usually stocks about 12 of them, and Miles City's got about 8 different ponds down in that south area, that southeastern area of Montana, and we stock the other 12.
Right. So for those that are listening that say, well, wait a minute, I really don't, fish Fort Peck. So is this podcast relevant? Well, yeah, it is, because those, no matter where you're fishing for walleye, you're probably benefiting from the efforts of Heath and Wade and their staff. So about how long does it take from the time an egg hits the hatchery to the time that a fry hits the water in, say, Fort Peck?
To hit the water in the reservoir, it can be roughly 17 to 21 days after we receive the eggs here.
I'll be damned.
That's about how long it takes them to hatch.
So from the time that you get those eggs, 17 days later, they're swimming around in Fort Peck and hopefully turning into a great big monster that the captain and I will catch.
Yep. And again, it's based on water temperature too. The colder the water is, it takes them a little bit longer to develop, but we're at about 48 degrees here at the hatchery. So it's between 15 and 17 days where we'll start seeing them to start hatch out. And like I said, we'll go possibly another 4 to 5 days after that, let them use that egg yolk a little bit so that when they do go into the reservoir, they're keying right on food that they can get to if it's there for them.
Oh, this is a question for Heath. When you plant those in, I'm assuming you use a boat ramp on the various lakes. Is that correct?
So in the case of Fort Peck, when we get fingerling walleye, from Wade and the staff at the hatchery here, we will actually do boat plants with some of those. We will do some right at the boat ramps, but just because Fort Peck is so gosh darn big, there's not a lot of other roads and access points. we want to spread them out a little bit more, just to give them good room to grow, and hopefully good food opportunities, good places to hide, just to, increase their chance of survival, and we typically do that, kind of in the lower half of the reservoir, starting from around Hell Creek. But then, we still do stock into the Big Dry Arm area as well. And I guess, kind of part of that stocking strategy is, going back to natural reproduction and successful spawning, we actually see, really good spawning recruitment from walleye in that western, portion of the reservoir and like the Missouri River itself. We're always seeing small fish up there with our sampling efforts. So we don't want to be, stocking more fish on top of more fish. We want to hopefully kind of get everybody, equal chance of survival and good room and good food opportunities.
Okay, so the reason why I asked that question, you plant salmon, and that's generally at a boat ramp area in Fort Peck. And so the salmon come back when they think they're going to spawn to those areas. Do the walleye do the same thing?
No, not necessarily. I mean, some could, but we've seen from tagging studies, actual like, a external tag on a walleye, over the years that some of those fish, that we capture in one area during spawning, they could actually potentially show up in another part of the reservoir, a few years down the road. So they're moving, it's not set in stone that they have to come back to the exact same place. It can be maybe in a general area. That's probably a better description, versus like a salmon.
Now, do you guys know what sex these fish are when you put them into, say, Fort Peck? Or is it just the roll of the dice with Mother Nature? Or do you have a way of say, kind of helping Mother Nature along in the hatchery before you hatch the eggs of determining the sex?
No, there's no way at that age. The eggs and the milk and that aren't produced at that early stage of life yet, so we're unable to tell. I bet, through genetics or something they could possibly do it. We don't. We just throw out what we get, and that's what ends up in the reservoir.
Well, and along that lines, another question I had was, I saw an article on MontanaOutdoor.com, and it talked about these biologists up in Canada that basically took some ancient DNA of dire wolves, which has been extinct for thousands of years, and basically created wolves that are out running around right now, not in the wild, but, using kind of a Jurassic Park kind of thing to it. Do you see that as a possibility down the road with what you guys do of being able to kind of help Mother Nature along? So say you could put more females in, or more importantly, could you produce, say, a Mega Walleye strain of just huge walleye? They all hung up the phone right there.
I was just kind of waiting to see who was going to jump on that one first. But I guess, it kind of almost sounds like, you're wondering a little bit about genetics, I guess, Dale,
Yeah.
and if that can play a role, into potential fish down the road, whatever it might be, like sizes and that sort of thing. And genetics can, but oftentimes, Mother Nature or environmental variables really will override genetics. And I think I've used this example in the past. Like for Fort Peck, I'm going to kind of go back to Chinook salmon, talking about them. We've obtained eggs from North Dakota, in certain years where we fell short. Okay. And so, typically their salmon over in North Dakota on Sakakawea don't get quite as big as what we see over here. And with that being said, so those eggs came from smaller parents essentially, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we raise them here at the hatchery, and then they get stocked out into Fort Peck. Well, 4 years down the road, those same fish, from those essentially smaller parents, we've seen them kind of get bigger than, their adults, that they came from. And that is largely Cisco driven. It's a forage type thing. So that's kind of where I'm going with, environmental conditions, habitat conditions, food, can sometimes really outweigh that.
Mm-hmm. And do you guys have any way of finding out, and this probably is impossible, but is there a way to factor in to say how many of those walleye that got put into Fort Peck actually made it to adulthood? Yeah, do you know that number?
Yeah, we kind of have a rough number. We actually did a research project here a few years back, and it was looking at, contribution basically of the walleye fingerlings that got stocked into Fort Peck. And it also kind of provided some insight into natural reproduction or spawning efforts too. And so what we saw, and what was really neat about the kind of the project, it occurred over quite a time frame. And what we saw was during lower reservoir elevations, we were actually seeing, a greater contribution of walleye fingerlings to the system. And if you think about it back then, so we're talking like mid 2000s, early 2000s, when reservoir elevations were really low, they didn't have like the gravel and rock habitat to spawn on, nor did they have, really any vegetation to hide in or any sort of cover once they hatched out, that would influence their survival. And there was some decent food opportunities, though, I will say that at that time. But once we started seeing an increase in water levels that submerged, the rock gravel for spawning habitat for the walleye, as well as, some plants that got flooded for places to them hide, good food, we actually started to see, kind of contribution of fingerlings decrease a little bit. They were still helping out, but it was also telling us that, Mother Nature and natural spawning was occurring, and, sometimes in some years, at pretty decent levels.
Oh, that's fascinating that you guys can get into that. Hey, we're going to take just a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about the health of the current walleye population that's swimming around in there, and see if Heath and Wade can talk to us a bit about that, as well as get into, well, how this whole Cisco plays into it. Heath brought that up a bit, but in a past podcast, we really got into some interesting stuff about how they're affecting the sport fish. So we'll talk about that when we come back right after this. Here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, we talk about doing fun stuff out here in Montana's great outdoors. Now, we don't bring up work, and we for sure don't talk about taxes. Well, that is until now. But hey, don't worry. I'm going to talk about those things in a good way. What do I mean by that? Well, my friends at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer can help you put your tax refund into the perfect equipment that will get the job done way faster, so you can get back out of here with us and do all the fun stuff in Montana's great outdoors. Now, how can that be? Well, just talk to the gang at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer, and they'll show you their incredible line of new baseline equipment trailers and dump trailers. I'm here to tell you, those are things that will for sure help you get the job done faster than you likely have ever thought possible. Now, let me give you an example. Baseline dump trailers have the absolute best combination of quality and functionality that will flat make those trailers the backbone of all your projects. See, the baseline dump trailers at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer feature a multifunctional gate with a holdback system and board brackets to give you extra hauling capacity and stability. And like I said, it's a dump trailer, so whether you're clearing debris, hauling gravel, or managing construction tasks, when you get to where you're going, you just turn it on, dump the load, and before you know it, you're heading to your favorite lake, river, or stream. And that's just one example of how my friends at Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer can help you increase your productivity and make your workday go a whole lot smoother and faster. So go see your baseline dealer. It's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They have inventory in stock right now for purchase. So go see them today. That's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, Montana at 5680 Expressway. Or just give them a call, 406-549-4243. Or you can go see their whole inventory online at rmtte.com. That's rmtte.com. Do it today because, hey, we miss you out here. It's time to come fishing. Back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, and this is, of course, your old buddy Downrigger Dale. We got the captain from the Montana Outdoor Radio Show with us, as well as Heath Headley, biologist for Fort Peck, and the guy that makes all the magic happen at the hatchery, that's Wade Geraets. He's with us as well. So let's talk a bit about the walleye that are swimming around right now. You know, we've talked about all these eggs that you collected and all that, but Heath, do you have a way of estimating how many walleye actually are in Fort Peck Reservoir right now?
From like an actual number standpoint, no.
Okay.
And again, just because of, obviously, I think we mentioned it earlier, the sheer size, it would be pretty challenging for us, to mark all those fish and try and track them down and whatnot. But what we do is, so we have some nets, and basically it's a standardized netting effort. We do it year after year, and what we call it is relative abundance. And so that's basically the number of walleye that we capture per net. And so that's what gives us, kind of an indication of, what's, just like you asked, what's the walleye population doing out there in Fort Peck? And what we've seen the last several years is actually a general increasing trend in numbers of walleye per net, which, is kind of what you hope for, really. You know, in theory, more fish out there, for anglers to potentially catch. Although there's some other factors that go in with that. But and not only do we look at those numbers, but we look at the sizes of walleye that we capture too. And you really want, kind of a mixed group of sizes, when you're out there. I know a lot of us kind of get hung up on, you need to see big fish out there, which, don't get me wrong, it's pretty neat and impressive to see that. But, as those fish are bigger, they're typically older. And at some point, they're going to start to phase out of the population. So we also need, fish that are smaller than them, middle-sized fish, and then even smaller fish that will eventually recruit into the fishery. And I guess, just to kind of wrap that all up is, we've seen, again, the last several years, really good diversity and sizes of walleye out there, everything from, 10, 12 inches to stuff in between, 16, 18, 20 inches. And then some of these older fish, upwards of upper 20-inch fish. And even looking at our otoliths, that confirms, that they're living a pretty long time, Dale. I think last year, looking at otoliths, I think our oldest walleye that we aged was 20 or 21 years old.
Wow.
So again, just kind of thinking about that, it's telling us that, mortality isn't high. They have all the food, they have all the habitat they need, and then natural mortality or angling mortality, as far as, us as fishermen, catching, bunches of fish, it's not excessive.
Well, Heath, I got a question for you as far as actual fishing. Last year, June was an extremely tough walleye bite on Fort Peck. Usually it starts picking up about the first part of June, and right in the middle of June it's doing pretty well. But it picked up right after the Governor's Cup. Now, the Governor's Cup, they caught some pretty good weights there, but it picked up right after the Governor's Cup and lasted until, which is the middle of July, lasted till the end of August. I mean, guys were going out there and they were wading through some of these smaller fish, when I say 23, 24, 25-inch fish, to try to catch and release a bigger fish. At least that's what they were telling me. Why would that be?
Well, that's an easy one. Most walleyes are Democrats. See?
I asked the question to Heath. So Heath, do you have any idea why that is? Or why that was last year?
I kind of think some of it had to do with just the conditions that we had going on. It seemed like in June, if I recall correctly, it seemed like there was a lot of windy days out there, and it seemed like, things just didn't stabilize for whatever reason in terms of like a bite. But yeah, it definitely picked up, as we went into mid-July and August. And I know I went out there, and even like, was it Memorial Weekend and first part of September, it was still good. So just, I think, had to do with some environmental conditions. But yeah.
You actually mean Labor Day weekend, first part of September.
Oh yeah.
But the temperature,
my days are all mixed up.
The surface water temperature was, I don't think it got above 60 degrees during June. And I think that might have lent some of it. Maybe those fish were deeper. I didn't hear a lot of, and I always have my ear right next to the water, and I actually stay by the boat ramp with my FWP costume on, and I do a survey for everybody that comes out when I don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, you're weird, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
Just a weird guy.
But one other question, Nelson Reservoir, I fish that, a few times a year. A lot of people fish that. You plant walleyes in Nelson Reservoir. How many you put in there on an annual basis, and how many do you think you'll put in this year?
I honestly couldn't tell you on Nelson Reservoir. I don't manage that body of water, Captain. So, yeah, I'm not sure, unless Wade might know what they have to stock in terms of number.
The number of fish that go into Nelson Reservoir every year is 100,000 of those fingerlings.
100,000.
Well, every year we'll stock 100,000, and this year we're planning on doing the same thing, stocking those 100,000 in there. Sometime here, probably in the next month and a half to 2 months. So
those walleye, the ones you can catch, are really healthy looking walleye. What do they have for forage there? I know in Fort Peck you talk about Cisco. They don't have any Cisco that I know of in Nelson Reservoir. What do they feed on?
Primarily yellow perch, I believe. Again, you have to talk to the Havre area fisheries biologist, as he monitors that pretty closely.
I was thinking it's probably all the fathead minnows that you keep losing off your hook, Captain.
Yeah, I do lose them, and I don't catch any walleye. Brian Olson, who I'm with some of the times, he catches a lot of walleye, but I try to mimic him, but it doesn't work out very well.
So, Heath, it sounds like, as far as the health of the walleye population in Fort Peck, it sounds, from what you're saying, that's a very healthy reservoir then for walleye right now.
Yeah, correct. And just to kind of go back to like our number of walleye that we see per net, last year was actually one of our higher numbers of walleye per net that we've seen in the last 20 years. So no, very encouraging stuff, and again, kind of just to, even talk about Cisco a little bit, I think, they've really been fueling this system, and it's not just, walleye. We're seeing it in our smallmouth bass, our northern pike, Chinook salmon, everything. So everything is really benefiting, and we're thankfully, knock on wood, we're in some pretty decent times at the moment.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it, some of the other species as well. But just staying with the walleye, one of the things I noticed is over the last few years, it seems like all the walleye tournaments that we see, that the numbers just get bigger and bigger as far as the size of those fish. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then, you think, well, these are professional guys. They know what they're doing. And they've got electronics. They're targeting bigger fish. But even just talking to friends and that, we're seeing, it seems like, much larger walleye. Is that something you're seeing from your netting surveys and all that? Are the walleye getting bigger in Fort Peck?
Yeah, it is. And, talking about otoliths and our age and growth information, and I think it bears repeating, that, like we had a very large year class of walleye produced in 2011. And so those fish are still out there swimming around. They're going to be, 14 years old here this spring, summer. And yeah, they're still doing well. They're in the upper 20-inch range, close to 30. And yeah, they're still thriving really. And then there's, other fish, a little bit older and a little bit younger than them too. So no, survival has just been exceptional. And then again, they're capitalizing on the abundance of Cisco that we've seen the last few years too. I mean, we've seen some record numbers of Cisco basically in 2023 and 2024.
Well, Heath, one of the things that some of the anglers talk about, and I heard this going around last year, is that the walleye, they're going to die off because they're getting so old. And it's going to, the whole population will crash. That's probably a topic for another time. But when a walleye dies naturally, do they die and go to the bottom of the lake? I've never really seen a walleye that's been dead that maybe it's been caught and released by a fisherman and they, it comes up there. But where do the walleye go?
You don't get invited.
Where do they go, Heath?
You don't get invited to the funerals?
No.
Oh yeah, I'm on the mailing list. I go to all of them. No.
Yeah, no, I mean some are going to sink, and that's just going to be part of it. There's obviously stuff that we cannot see visually, just because it's underneath the water.
They just keel over right there. They're swimming, and all of a sudden, I mean, would they die of heart condition, or I mean, how would they? Maybe I'm getting a little bit too far-fetched on this thing. I'm not that concerned about, the walleyes that are dying, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think they've done any walleye autopsies here lately, but God. Where I was going with this is when I did that podcast with Andrew McKean, and he did this article. You can see it in Montana Outdoors magazine. It's called the Double Cheeseburger with Fins, and it talks about the Cisco and what an incredible superfood they are for the sport fish in Fort Peck. And he kind of surmises that that's why we're seeing bigger and bigger fish in Fort Peck. In fact, he even made a prediction on the podcast that he thinks that somebody's going to be catching a 40-pound pike one of these days soon in Fort Peck.
It actually was a double bacon cheeseburger.
Yeah.
And that's how they die, the bacon.
Yeah. So what are you seeing as far as that Cisco population goes? One is that the takeaway I got from that is that it seems like the Cisco are actually kind of changing the feeding habits a bit of the sport fish in Fort Peck, and that, a lot of people that fish for, say, lake trout or fishing for the salmon, the king salmon in Fort Peck, they'll catch these walleye deep, suspended in, real deep water. And what Andrew was saying was he feels that that's the Cisco, more and more of the larger walleye, larger pike and all that are going deep and following these big schools of Cisco, kind of like what the salmon do. And so it's the lakes kind of evolve in that way. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I will say though, I think it's probably been going on longer than we think, and I say that because, there's more people that are targeting salmon now, and doing, fishing deeper than, traditionally. And as a result, you're picking up a walleye here and there along with a pike. So yeah. And the other thing to add is, we haven't seen like a lot of, shoreline forage. So like perch, crappies, some of our shiner species, in very large abundances the last couple of years, but Cisco, on the other hand, most definitely. Like I mentioned before, 2023 and 2024, we really saw some good numbers of Cisco out there, and they're going to go where the groceries are. If there's nothing shallow for them, they got to try and find food somewhere. And yeah, it's not out of the question to see walleyes out that deep, pike that deep, even catfish. Like when we do deep water netting surveys for Cisco, as well as salmon and lake trout, yeah, we're catching, like I said, pike, walleye, catfish that are down there that deep. And even when we pull those catfish up, they're regurgitating adult Cisco, that are 7, 8, 10 inches in size sometimes.
Catfish, I'll be danged.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is a question for Wade. You guys collect northern pike eggs. Do they take a little bit of a different deal in the hatchery than a walleye egg?
Yeah, we basically, they pretty much hatch in the same type of jars as the walleyes do at the hatchery here. We do a little bit of different setup on them. We have some smaller troughs that once they hatch, the northern pike like to attach to the edges of the tanks, or we actually use burlap that we hang in the water. And these northern pike, what we call northern pike fry, will actually attach to this and come off the bottom of the tanks. And this just kind of helps them sit there, and they don't do much at that stage. Northern pike don't do much at that stage until they start using up that egg yolk, which is a little bit longer than the walleye. And then once they start losing that egg yolk more, they'll actually swim off the edges of the tanks, and the burlap starts swimming around. And that's the key for myself and the hatchery staff here to know at that time those pike need to get out to a body of water, or we actually have one pond reserved for northern pike here this year out here at the hatchery that we'll grow out fingerlings to be able to stock those into areas around Montana.
So, Heath, when you're collecting eggs, do you target northern pike, or do you just, there's a northern pike, big northern pike female that's in the nets? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, no, we try to, and we I explain this to like the volunteers, that help with the walleye spawn, or anybody else that ask. Even though we have nets, it still is a little bit like fishing. There's certain spots that, are better for walleye, it seems like, and then other spots that are better for pike. And with that being said, we'll try and look for like a shallow backwater bay almost, if like Wade and the hatchery staff need to get some northern pike eggs for a particular year, and set that net there. And usually, we're somewhat successful. It's filled more with pike than it is walleye. So yeah.
We're going to take another quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk a bit about some of the other things that the hatchery produces and does, as well as we're going to see if we can poke a little into the future on what the salmon might be, and what the health of that is, as well as, quite a few other things. So stick around. We'll be right back after this. Have you ever thought of doing a DIY project for your home? I've known John, Corey, and the rest of the gang at Superior Hardwoods in Missoula, Montana for a very long time. They've always been there for me, and I know they'll be there for you too. A true partner to help complete your DIY home improvements. Heck, they have been doing that since 1977. Whether you're dreaming of a charming accent wall or a complete floor makeover, they have it covered. There is no better feeling than the satisfaction of adding a touch of history to your home with their unique reclaimed woods. Now, I'm not just talking about lumber here. I'm talking about a story waiting to be told. My friends at Superior Hardwoods of Montana proudly stock over 11 acres of stunning reclaimed wood, perfect for turning your house into a home that is as unique as, you are. And don't worry, if you're just starting out with your first DIY project, the pre-finished flooring, pre-finished paneling, and trim options at Superior Hardwoods make it easier than ever to tackle any project like you've been doing it for years. So what do you say, gang? Why not dive into your next DIY adventure with confidence and let the decades of experience that they have at Superior Hardwoods take you through every step? Need a little inspiration? Well, visit them online at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, that's a great place to start out by browsing their website, again, at superior-hardwoods.com. That's superior-hardwoods.com. Not only will they help guide you through your home makeover with all their amazing ideas and their over 100,000 square feet of the most incredible wood flooring, paneling, and other wood products, they'll actually guide you through the woods. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. First time I went to their showroom just south of Missoula on Highway 93 South, I was blown away by the unbelievable selection of different types of wood from not just Montana, but from all over the world. Best of all, I sat down with them, told them a bit about what I was thinking of doing, and the next thing I knew, I was hearing incredible ideas and learning about the perfect wood for what I wanted to do. That is what I mean by letting them guide you through the woods at Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Go see them. Back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, Downrigger Dale, along with the captain of the Montana Outdoor Radio Show. We've got Heath Headley with us, as well as Wade Geraets. And we're talking about the hatchery, the walleye spawn, all that stuff. But I wanted to branch out a little further even. Wade, what else does the hatchery produce? I mean, we spent a lot of time, of course, because it's relevant. We're talking about the walleye spawn. But what else does the hatchery produce as far as other types of fish?
Well, right now, like we just talked about, we do have the northern pike this year here. We also have roughly, I'm going to say probably about 260 to 270,000. They're about 4 inches right now, Chinook salmon that'll be going out in June to the reservoir. And then we also raise 2 different strains of rainbow trout. These rainbow trout are going to be either fingerlings or catchables, the catchables are usually about 7 inches, and the fingerlings are about 3 inches, and we'll stock those out. And those trout usually we stock a lot of what we call urban ponds or kids ponds in different towns around this, what we call Region 6 up here, basically from Plentywood over to Havre. And we stock them on basically private ponds that the landowners actually allow the public to come and fish on. We'll stock their ponds with trout too, so people in those different areas have places to go fish for trout. But yeah, right now we're basically sitting with the walleye, the pike, the Chinook salmon, and the rainbow trout.
So when I go to the grocery store, my wife gives me a list of things to pick up. Do you do the same thing with Heath Headley when it comes to getting eggs? Let's see, I need, Heath, I'm going to have this many Chinook salmon. I need this many walleye eggs. I need this many northern pike eggs. Or do you just deal with what he brings you? Or do you ever go out and try to help him collect some of these eggs?
The hatchery staff's actually down there with the walleye spawn. They're bringing the fish to us, and we're actually spawning those walleye right there on Fort Peck Reservoir, right where the nets are usually placed at. Like this year was down up at Nelson Creek there, and they did that with the northern pike and the walleye this year. And then with the Chinook salmon, when they go out there to collect the male and female Chinook salmon in the fall time, we're usually there helping them net the fish out, and we bring the adults back here to the hatchery, and we actually spawn those Chinook salmon here at the hatchery. Whereas the trout are a little bit different. We actually get eggs from a couple different hatcheries in Montana. And bring those eggs in.
Have you ever had any requests for drum eggs? Because the drum will sit there and feel like a walleye, you think you got a big walleye on, and it's a drum. And I think the drum has got to be the most disrespected fish in Fort Peck, because everybody catches one. Most of the people that catch them, they go, that's a drum. They're all excited about seeing this large walleye. There's a drum. So then you put it back in the water. And I just can't imagine. I was thinking to myself when I was fishing with Downrigger, because I like to think about a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Besides talking to Downrigger,
Well,
I was thinking a drum would actually get up and say, please fillet me. I want to be filleted. I want to be a fish. And there are people that eat drum.
Really?
Yeah. And it's a white meat. We put drum, northern pike, bass, and walleye in a fish fry. We had a fish feed. Nobody knew the difference between any of them.
Really?
Yeah. Of course, it had to do a lot with what they were drinking
I was just
before
gonna
that.
say,
Yeah.
How drunk were they before you served dinner? So what about the drum, Heath? Is that something? Do you do some of these forage fish, or are you stocking any of those, or are they just kind of on their own?
No, collection efforts or anything like that with the forage fish. Everything is pretty much on their own. And, one of the reasons is, given the, size of the system, at least Fort Peck, it's kind of a tough thing. And honestly, they can be pretty prolific, if need be, given the right environmental conditions.
Right. And, we look at, for forage fish, the Cisco has been, such a huge success story. And I mean, it's really helped, change that reservoir.
Well, drum is not a forage fish.
You know what, Captain? Dale is actually correct on this one.
Well, thanks a lot for pointing that out, Heath.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And you're from the area in South Dakota that I'm from. In fact, they still have that statue right in front of Clark when you come into Clark, South Dakota, of you holding a big egg. And it's got a bunch of white stuff from the birds on it now, and I tried to clean it off, but it's been on there for quite a while.
Yeah, there's a lot of times that I'm right. I just rarely have a scientist like Heath to be able to back me up here. But let's mark that on the calendar.
Smallmouth bass. How come you don't do any egg collection for them?
They actually do pretty gosh darn well on their own. And interestingly enough, when we do some surveys, like actually looking for perch and crappie that hatch out in the spring, they're relatively abundant, pretty much throughout the reservoir, in decent numbers too. So they're spawning on their own and doing their own thing and pretty successful.
So, and looking at back to when I was talking earlier about the size of the walleye that we're seeing that just seem to be getting bigger and bigger. And we see the same thing. We're seeing new state records on king salmon, on smallmouth bass and all that. What I'm feeling, of course, maybe it's just wishful thinking, but it seems like Fort Peck is just becoming this world-class fishery for multiple species. I mean, I really see in the future where this reservoir is going to become like the bucket list place to go in the world. Are you seeing that from, you guys do a lot of these netting surveys and stuff. Are you just seeing these bigger and bigger fish, or am I just wishful thinking here?
No, we are as well. Yeah. And again, it really circles back to, just the large abundance of Cisco that we've seen in the system. And it's funny because I did kind of just like jot a couple notes down of like things that stuck out to me during the walleye spawn this year, and you're talking about like big, healthy looking walleyes. And, I know that, so like measuring some of these females, and obviously they had eggs in them and whatnot, but we had a 27-inch female walleye with eggs in her. She weighed 10 pounds. We had a 28-inch female walleye. Again, she still had her eggs in. We call them green. she was 12 pounds.
Hmm.
And then we had a 30.2-inch walleye that weighed 13.8 pounds. You know, so these fish, again, yeah, they're really capitalizing on the Cisco out there. And that's the good thing too. If you have a good forage base, good food abundances, that's good for, spawning efforts down the road. Those females can, take that energy that they get from their food source and allocate it towards egg production, and in turn get, hopefully good, healthy eggs, that are really good and viable.
Well, before we go on, and I want to thank both of you for your time on this, because it's been fascinating, and I mean we could go for hours, but I know you got to get back to taking care of those fish and making this fishery keep doing what it's doing. But for both of you, I guess we can start with you, Heath. Is there anything new that you've learned about walleye, or is there something that stands out to you that says, "Wow, this fish is amazing"? Because, go ahead and finish that sentence. What would you think it is?
Sure. Yeah, I think again, to just kind of maybe, summarize and recap what we talked a little bit about, is just kind of the Cisco and walleye interaction that we've seen the last couple years out there in Fort Peck. And really, like I mentioned, 2023 and 2024, we had some really good Cisco numbers. They were actually slow growing, really small, but, we saw, some of our netting surveys that like these 13-inch walleye were eating a 5.5-inch Cisco, and it's just, again, going back to that whole, comment from you about, these fish getting really big. Yeah, it's showing in what we have for food out there in the system, So I guess to me, that's probably the most interesting thing that we've seen the last couple years, with the walleye.
What about you, Wade?
Well, I don't know if it's the last couple years, but just something interesting hatchery-wise is the knowing that a walleye fry's got about 5 days to use up that egg yolk before it has to start eating live food. And then it only takes them about 4 to 5 weeks to get to about 2 inches. And roughly around that 2-inch size for these walleye that are in our ponds out here is they actually become very cannibalistic and will start eating each other. So they need to get back out to that reservoir to find other food to eat. Whereas compared to like a Chinook salmon, it'll take roughly 30 to 40 days for them to use that egg yolk up before we'll even start feeding them throughout the rest of the year. So just something just between the two different species that's different. So,
well, and lastly, getting a little off topic, but before we know it, the Fort Peck is going to be packed with people coming after those great big Chinook salmon. What do you feel, Heath, is the outlook for the salmon this year? I mean, we call it the salmon season, but I mean, people are already catching them now. What's the outlook for this year for catching great big gigantic salmon in the captain's boat on the end of my rod?
Which are all the rods in the boat?
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually pretty optimistic. Based on what we saw last year, just with being out there fishing, and then what we saw in the fall when we collected, some of those adults. And so kind of what it's looking like here in 2025 is, I'm thinking we should see some 3-year-old Chinook salmon that are maybe going to weigh, somewhere in the teens. It's, I guess probably a little bit kind of, I guess from my end, kind of tough to tell exactly what they're going to weigh, but I think they're going to be some healthy looking fish. I don't think we're going to see the big fish that we saw last year, just because those were some 4-year-old fish, that had been around a little bit longer. Granted, they had a lot of Cisco just like they do this year, but yeah, I don't think we're going to quite see those bigger fish, but there's always a chance,
Yeah.
That means you're basically, both of you guys are not doing your job if we don't see those bigger fish. I heard that too, that the one guy told me you'd be lucky to see one over 20 pounds. But I tell you what, it's still fun fishing them, and a 11-pound salmon fights pretty darn hard, and they'll take the reel. There's a lot of pressure on these guys from Heath and Wade, from everybody, from the people that make a living over in that area, and you guys do an excellent job, and you're always there to answer questions. I've never seen any of you run the other way unless it's me going to chase after you. So I want to thank you guys for what you do for the fishery at Fort Peck and other fisheries around the state of Montana.
Yeah, I'd say ditto on that for sure. I really appreciate both your time. Wade, thank you as well for everything you do in that hatchery, and pass it on to the whole staff there, because you guys really do a heck of a job.
I'll make sure to do that, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. We learned a lot here, and it's an exciting time for Fort Peck as it continues to evolve to a world-class fishery. It's going to be interesting to see how that keeps going. So when you see these fellas walking around, tell them thanks, and be sure, and also send us your pictures, because we love to post it on MontanaOutdoor.com. So when you get that great big walleye or salmon or a smallie or whatever it is, let us know, because we love to do that, and it's a lot of fun to see how things are going.
Not only a big thank you for Heath and Wade, but also have a $1 bill or $5 to put in his, because those containers don't have any eggs now, because they're all through the incubator and in the hatchery.
I don't think they're allowed to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying they carry that around with them. Just pop it in there. That's a big thank you. And I said $1 or $5, and they're going, really? How about 100? That'd be better.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll pass muster, but good idea. But you can always buy Captain and I a beer, and,
and we'll thank them for you.
We'll thank them for you. No
In fact,
problem.
we'll call them up during the time we're having that beer
and say, "Hey guys, we're really enjoying this beer." No, we appreciate it, guys. Pretty exciting times, and it'll be interesting to see how things go. And of course, we're going to keep filling you in, but we've got a lot of other things to talk about on this podcast as we go all around the great state of Montana. And be sure and let us know, what are some of the other topics you want us to cover. Until we talk again, folks, have a great day. Be good to each other, and let's see, catch some big uns. And tell us all about it here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to Downrigger at MontanaOutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.